This is all that is left of the vast railway sidings where the Love Parade 2010 event was held. It is as though the city has tried to sweep the worst ever festival disaster under the carpet. 21 young people died at the foot of these stairs on the 24th of July 2010 during the annual Electronic Dance Music Festival. An absurd tragedy that no one has been held responsible for in the law courts.
After I saw the images briefly on television, I just thought, what did you do with my child? What did you do with my child? Those were my first thoughts.
Am ersten Tag nach der Katastrophe war das schon so.
On the first day after the catastrophe, everyone was a bit lost. And there were parents looking for their children, mothers who came up to me and said, "Can you help me? I'm looking for my daughter, and I'm looking for my son." There was such chaos that nobody knew who was where or in which hospital, who was injured or who had lost their lives. It took some time before everything was cleared, and so, of course, I could do nothing. What should I have done? And so this helplessness, to stand there while mothers were searching for their children, this is a moment I will never forget.
The victims and relatives were extremely disappointed. They thought that the German judiciary would somehow fix the whole thing, and that was a big mistake. So the disappointment is huge.
What went wrong on that hot afternoon in this wealthy German city has not been deemed a criminal act. But lawyers, survivors and victims' families have waited for over a decade to see the errors that led to the disaster fully exposed and recognized. Since 1989, the Love Parade had been billed as a celebration of the new freedoms enjoyed by all Germans as the era of the divisive Berlin Wall was coming to an end. First held in Berlin, it grew each year until in 2007 the event moved out of Germany's new capital.
Check this out. 1, 2, 3, in the place to be, and it goes something like this.
In 2010, the new organizer, Rainer Schaller, owner of fitness brand McFit, identified Duisburg, the European culture capital for that year, as the place to hold the Love Parade.
Die Veranstaltung 2010 sollte in jedem Fall stattfinden. Der politische Druck war.
The 2010 event was supposed to take place in any case. The political pressure was enormous because the Love Parade had previously been cancelled in Bochum for security reasons. This time, security concerns were raised again, and therefore a coordinator was appointed. That was the Emergency Response Ordnance Officer Rabe, and he then put pressure on the building administration, and this then became political pressure.
Also vor der Love Parade selbst wurde vom Veranstalter ein Gutachten beauftragt.
Before the Love Parade itself, the organizer commissioned an expert opinion to investigate and simulate the evacuation of the site. So we carried out this simulation and presented it to the organizer, who then used it in the approval process. For this purpose, the ground plan of the site is represented in the model, which takes into account the population, that's to say, the people who are there, plus a few other parameters, such as the reaction times and the distribution of running speeds, buildings, and we simulate how the site empties in the event of an evacuation, and in particular, the time it takes.
Leert im Falle einer Evakuierung und wie lange das dauert insbesondere.
The event arena area selected was the old railway siding near the Duisburg station. In the center were two long buildings, and the idea was to have the floats circle around them, while access to the site was via the tunnel of Karl-Lehr-Straße, which offered two access points to the raised concert area. One was to serve as an entry and an exit point, and another just exit. Another opening to the north of the area was discarded as being too close to the railway station. The organisers wanted to thin the crowds out before they reached the site. Julius Reiter is the lawyer representing the victims' families in the law courts.
Geld spielt immer eine Rolle bei all diesen Entscheidungen, insbesondere für den Veranstalter, der
Money always plays a role in all of these decisions, especially for the promoter, who of course made more money, or could have made more money, from advertising, because the whole thing took place on an enclosed site, rather than throughout the town. And then the property also plays a role. The property was given to the organizer for free, but it was marketed and sold at the same time, because the event had a good PR effect, that this property had something to do with the love parade, but that was before, not afterwards.
zu tun hatte, aber das war eben im Vorfeld, danach nicht mehr.
On the day of the concert, the motorway that runs alongside the site was closed as a possible emergency exit. Today, the main ramp has been covered over. Only a sliver of it is still visible. At the bottom of the stairs of death, the monument to the tragedy. Today, the area where the concert was held is being demolished for development. The site was certified to host no more than 140,000 people at a single time, although the organisers expected 250,000. They claimed the number would be fluid, with participants coming and going, and that at no one time would the legal concentration of people be exceeded. Local police objected to this, but were overruled by the city planners, facing pressure from business interests. The organisers were confident that they could control the crowds, and hired expert Hubert Klüpfel to carry out evacuation simulations.
Es gab mehrere Szenarien in der Simulation. Zum Beispiel eine teilweise.
There were several scenarios in the simulation. For example, one, a partial evacuation up to and including a complete emptying of the area. In this case, even only via the exits that were available as standard. With such a large number of people, that certainly leads to congestion, which was then also visible in the results of the simulation. But in this case, they were rated as acceptable overall. That was one of the main results of this simulation.
Das war eines der wesentlichen Ergebnisse dieser Simulation, ja.
Christian Müller was excited to go, and he got up early at home in Koblenz, where his mother helped him prepare for the big day.
Ja, also das war den Samstagmorgen. Ja, dann
It was Saturday morning. We got up very early together, and the first question was, "What am I going to wear, Mum?" And I bought a T-shirt just before that, because actually when I drove into town, I always bought him something. Although most of the time he complained, like that, and then there was a bright pink-coloured one. And I just thought at first, oh God. And then he said, "Mum, can I wear this?" And I say, "Yes, that's been washed," and so on and so forth. But then he took a shower, and I went to the baker to get some fresh rolls, so at least he ate a little something before he left the house.
Bäcker gefahren, ich denke, hol noch Brötchen, damit wenigstens ein bisschen isst, ehe aus dem Haus geht.
Thanks to the incredible work of a group of students who built the site Love Parade 2010 docu, we can now build a video chronology of the events. This is the train station, where most of the attendees were to arrive. In previous events, the station was where most people concentrated. Reporter Jessica Weston and her film crew were at the station to cover the event. Later, she wrote a book about the life-changing assignment.
The atmosphere at the beginning was really great. Everyone was looking forward to this day, and we had already talked about whether it might get a little too crowded. It was already clear to us that the area was not that big, and I knew the Love Parade in Berlin. I was there myself, both privately and professionally, and I knew what it looked like. The area was, of course, much larger, so people had an alternative if it got too tight. I was on the site the evening before the disaster, and had already seen all the barriers, and actually briefly thought, that doesn't look too good.
The access point closest to the station was shut off to force visitors to walk down to the Karl-Leostraße entrance points, thereby thinning out the crowd as it approached. Police barriers were used to thin the crowd out further and avoid a big crush. Events were to unfold under the watchful eyes of 1,000 police officers and a dozen CCTV cameras. Marco Pesch was in this crowd.
Hat echt gut angefangen gehabt.
The morning had started really well. Me and my brother and two other friends were excited. How will the day be? We already knew it from Berlin. We'd been there in the previous years. Yes, it was even warmer. And that's why we actually said, it's like that again. It's really nice and warm. So it could go well, couldn't it? We would have fun. Again and again. And at the same time, we'd already asked ourselves, what's it going to be like here in Duisburg?
At first, the plan seemed to be working. But something was very wrong. The kind of unexpected event that should have been planned for. It is the morning of the 24th of July 2010. The city is waking up, and the Love Parade event is ready to start. Christian Müller is excited to go, and Gabi Müller, his mother, helps him get ready.
Ja, dann hatte als ich wiederkam, hatte schon geduscht.
When I came back, he had already showered. Yes, then he was in the bathroom when he said, "Mum, can you do my hair? Because I'm a hairdresser. It's already too long again." And so on and so forth. "Yes," I say, "it's good." "Yes," he said, "but it has to last the whole day." So then he ate his bread and then he left at 9:30 a.m. He met friends, there were 8 of them, and they went to the train station and took the train to Duisburg.
Nicole Ballhauser was one of the event stewards on the day and was stationed at the west entrance to the long tunnel that covered Karl-Leostraße.
The day was actually very nice. It was warm. The people were all in a really good mood. They were laughing. Even when we stood upstairs and said, "We have to close for a moment," they all understood that. We said, "We want to guarantee your safety so that you can get to the site sensibly."
I actually started the day with a relaxed feeling, although I already had a slightly queasy feeling, but I didn't really take it seriously myself. And on the day, the joy and the positive excitement outweighed everything. I also think that when everyone arrived at Duisburg Central Station, I stood there with the camera team and everyone was in a great mood and they were really looking forward to this day and everything was totally relaxed in the beginning. We actually expected that there might be problems here and there, but minor problems. But the first few hours, everything was so relaxed and it wasn't too crowded either, so it was a great, fun atmosphere.
We should normally open the entrance at 11 a.m. Then we got a notification shortly beforehand that it would take another hour. They'd have to do something up here and smooth out the area. That also delayed it. But when you talk to the people who, thank God, they all said, "Yes, okay, we understand, it's stupid." Some complained, but most of them were calm. You could calm them down.
The late opening creates a rush to get to the concert area where the music floats have already begun rotating around the railway freight buildings. The sequence of events that begins at 3:30 p.m., however, is inexplicable and turns a risk to the safety of the public into a reality. The radio conversations show the police desperately balancing the frustration of revelers against occupation of the site. The floats are circling too close to the entry ramp, and visitors are not spreading out. Several stretches of fencing are torn down, with revelers entering by unauthorized routes, such as the hill before the tunnel and the motorway. At 3:30 p.m., police announced that access will be closed altogether. However, radio communications in the tunnel are bad. As a result, we have an incomplete record of police radio messages during the tragedy. At 3:50, a police cordon is set up to the west of the narrow side exit from the festival area. 7 minutes later, at 3:57, the police cordon off the eastern entrance to the tunnel. In the meantime, a large influx of visitors builds up behind the westernmost police cordon, an inexplicable surge of people, and the cordon moves a few meters backwards behind the entrance to the second exit. Six minutes later, the police also cordon off the main entry and exit ramp at the bottom and stop anyone leaving the grounds. The area between the cordon is almost empty. Rather than let the visitors dribble in an orderly fashion, they are simply stopped altogether. Ten minutes later, the eastern cordon dissolves after scuffles with the police, and the crowd surges forward. 3 minutes later, the police cordon west of the main entrance also dissolves. Like a tidal wave, the two masses of music fans surge together and make their way up the ramp, only to find that the mass of people leaving the grounds is blocking them. There is no way forward and no way back. Now the revelers try to get out of the impasse by climbing the stairs to their left, and even the trellis to the right, and even climb on top of the container that is the office of the crowd manager, who alerts the police but is without cell phone coverage and without a radio. The stairs have been cordoned off by metal fences, but these are ripped down and become tripping points.
And then someone came and suddenly said, "Down there, a catastrophe's broken out. The police are intervening." I looked at him. He had very big eyes, and I thought, okay, he did some drugs, so didn't react to it. But a few minutes later, someone came again who was completely normal and said, "Down there, the police are intervening. They need help." Then we, 6 of us, went down there.
From police records, we know that a police officer calls his commanders using his mobile phone at 4:35 p.m, warning that there is a deadly situation arising and the police should send reinforcements. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the ramp, the mass of people begins swaying with shock waves that no one can control. But when a police vehicle arrives at 4:50 p.m, the situation gets worse as members of the crowd get behind the van and follow it through the space it leaves behind, like the wake of a large ship. The police officer, whose call sign is Jupiter 01, calls his colleague, call sign Egon 10, at 5:02 p.m. to report the first deaths. Marco Pesch was there.
Ich habe das alles hier persönlich miterlebt, ne? Man guckte und
I saw this, everything here with my own eyes. You looked around and, yes, noticed something was wrong here. At the time, the people who came from there somehow hoped, okay, now we're going up the stairs quickly and away. But they weren't let through by the police.
Von der Polizei her, ne?
Anyone tripping up or falling is trampled by people being pushed from behind and from the front. While people around them try to help, there is no way to push back or even tell the oncoming crowd to stop. The first police reinforcements arrive at 5:08 p.m. and begin securing the pile of bodies at the bottom of the stairs. The area is evacuated as the police let the crowd into the concert arena, and those coming down the tunnel are blocked again.
The tunnel was empty. There were people crying, and then we went around the bend. And then I was in the middle of the disaster. People had already died, some were already being resuscitated. There were things everywhere, shoes, bags, everything was lying around. So for me that's how I imagine war. That's how I felt back then. Yes, that went straight into my head. This is how war must be, where everything is lying around. And then I helped with resuscitation. I took care of the injured. Afterwards, we covered the dead, fenced them in, so it went from one minute to the other. Suddenly, your life was completely different.
I had the mobile number of the press spokesman for the Duisburg police, and so I called him, and I could already hear from the tone of his voice when he answered that something was wrong. I knew him very well, and I knew that he was actually a very happy person, and I could already hear the tension in his voice. Of course, I asked him, "Do you know anything about possible dead?" And then he said, "Ms. Weston, yes, I can confirm to you at least 10, but there will probably be more, because we're still just trying to resuscitate."
There was already police down there. Where I was down there, everything was already dissolved. There weren't that many people there anymore, and so even the policemen, they cried because they saw it. As they saw it, everyone was overwhelmed with this situation. Yes, one of the first victims I saw as I came round the corner, I was standing in front of a dead man, and that was probably Christian Müller. They told me later.
What happened to Christian Müller and 20 other young people was the result of poor planning and wishful thinking. Waves of people and several tripping points led to a fatal crush. It was unthinkable for the parents of those young people. While the Love Parade disaster is unfolding in Duisburg, in far-off Koblenz, Christian Müller's mother has no idea that anything has gone wrong.
It must have been around 5 p.m. I went to the shop, and then when I was shopping, an acquaintance of Christian's also worked there. He said to me, "Gabi, did you hear that there are possibly 10 dead in Duisburg?" Yes, I was shocked, and I thought, how can there be 10 dead?
Then we saw completely disturbed people. We saw people who were completely black with dust, who had completely blank looks. We saw countless people lying on the floor. We saw rescue workers at the scene of the accident. And so later, I was right there at the scene. There were, of course, the outline drawings where the dead lay. There were trampled sunglasses, tattered feather boas, shoes, tons of shoes, because people lost their shoes in the crowd. There were also barriers on the floor, which should actually secure these stairs that afterwards everyone tried to climb to get out of the crowd, and they must have then got their feet trapped with their shoes on these fence barriers and then just lost their balance. And of course they also fell.
Und sind natürlich auch zu Fall gekommen.
Ja, und dann bin ich nach Hause gefahren und als ich dann nach Hause kam, war mein Mann aber nicht zu Hause.
I drove home, and when I got home, my husband wasn't home. Then I panicked, and I tried to contact Christian, but then only the mailbox was on. Then I turned on the TV, and I saw these bad pictures. Yes, then I can't tell how much time passed. I just kept thinking, my God, what happened there?
Nicht mehr einordnen und dann habe ich nur immer gedacht, mein Gott, was ist denn da passiert?
Also es gibt
So there are people who have been injured in their bodies, physically, that is, have been injured because they were lying in this pile. There were people who were intertwined with each other and then had to be pulled apart. Some of them suffered fractures, bruises, and then very many are psychologically stressed by everything. So yes, there are people that have been stressed physically and mentally. A client has, for example, had problems with her leg that she could not move properly for several years, but at the same time also experienced psychological trauma and has also received treatment.
Psychisch ein Trauma erlebt und ist auch in Behandlung gegangen.
Kam dann, das war so gegen 19 Uhr muss das gewesen sein, circa.
It was around 7 p.m. It must have been around then. My husband came, and then my brother was there, and my brother's partner. And by then I knew something bad had happened. My husband then only said to me, "Gabi, calm down. Christian is among the injured." And then I said, "How do you know that?" My husband had watched sports in the afternoon, and there were news flashes about the deaths in Duisburg. But my husband always calmed down and said, "No, nothing happened to Christian. They left so early. He's already on the premises."
Dass es da Tote gibt. Ja, und dann hat mein Mann sich immer beruhigt und hat gesagt, nein, dem Christian ist nichts passiert. Die sind so früh los, der ist da schon auf dem Gelände.
Ja, man kommt zurück.
Yes, I looked back, looked around again, and I see a boy running. He fetched water, bottles of water, and tried to distribute it, yes. Then I also hold up my hand and I say, "Here, we still need water from down here." And then I'm being pushed back again, against the wall. No, and I see a boy sitting and wanted to give him water. I didn't manage it, let me say, because he did not make it alive. Because then someone came from the other side and just put a jacket on the floor and put it over his head. And then, yes, it became clear.
Gabi Müller is convinced Christian is safe. But then a friend of his brings them the tragic news that no parent wants to hear.
Meanwhile, a friend of Christian's, Damien, who actually wanted to go with them but didn't make it and then stayed at home, and Christian's friends who were there with him, called Damien and told Damien that Christian is dead. And then Damien said, "I'm going to Christian's parents right away. They shouldn't find out about this from strangers." But then he came to us, yes, and rang the bell. My husband went to the door, and then he just said, "Damien, Christian is not here yet. They're in Duisburg." And then Damien kept saying, "Mr. Müller, something bad has happened. Christian is among the dead."
Und dann hat Damien nur immer gesagt, Herr Müller, es ist was Schlimmes passiert. Der Christian ist unter den Toten.
What none of the organisers expected to happen has just become a tragic reality. Now, all they can do is count the dead and wounded. The grief and trauma will last for years. What killed 21 people on the 24th of July 2010 was not a natural or even an engineering disaster. It was the result of poor planning. Hubert Klüpfel, who had written the evacuation plan, was shocked that this could have happened in modern Germany.
Also die erste Reaktion war, das ist nicht möglich.
So the first reaction was, that is not possible. That cannot be. This does not exist in Germany. This cannot be because this is an event where 1,000 police officers are on site, men and women police officers. They are always in a position to control the situation. It is impossible for something like this to happen. That was the thought. Yes. And then I think it came on TV, and it was indeed the case. Then it was like, I asked myself, how? How can that be? What happened there?
Wie kann das sein? Was ist da passiert?
Ja, dann hatten die auch so eine Hotline da eingerichtet, wo man anrufen konnte.
They had set up a hotline where you could call, and at some point I got through there. I think that was midnight, yes. Then I just passed on his personal details, but they didn't say anything, so we just sat and waited, because you always think that someday someone has to come. Then it was around 4:30 or 4 a.m. Then the bell rang and I went. At first I thought, this is Christian, because he didn't take a key. Then I opened the door and there were 2 police officers. And then I just knew. And I said, I know what you want to tell us.
Und dann standen da 2 Kripo-Beamte. Und dann weiß ich nur, dass ich gesagt habe, ich weiß, was sie uns sagen wollen. Ne?
In his analysis of the tragedy, Hubert Klüpfel identifies several strategic errors in the way access was organized. Why wasn't the northern opening used as an exit? Simply because the planners wanted to avoid a build-up of crowds in the station. By forcing people to walk from the tunnel to the station, either via the east or west exits of Karl-Lehrstraße, they would dilute the flow of people into the station. But by blocking the exit and failing to push those leaving onto the other ramp, they effectively created the conditions for the fatal crush. The 3 cordons were acting independently and, apparently, with no central coordination and massive communications failures. The phone lines were jammed. The floats drove past there because people didn't get onto the site fast enough. Then the entry control into the tunnels was opened or collapsed, and even more people streamed into the tunnels. And then also from below onto the ramp. At the same time, people also came onto the ramp from above. That means they met there on this ramp. It became more and more dense and narrow. Then people could no longer have an overview of what the situation was, and got under enormous stress, and then wanted to climb these stairs, and the containers and these masses that stood at the side just escaped from this situation.
We know from concerts that when many people stand very close together, at some point these wave movements arise. And then, in this situation, we now had additional effects, such as, for example, barriers that were on the floor, where people got caught with their feet. You can imagine, if the upper body is pushed further, but the foot is stuck at the bottom, then of course they automatically get inclined, and as a result, people literally piled on top of each other at some point. So, in the end, the emergency services even spoke of a crowd or a mass of people, and the people who were lying down there, who perished in this crowd, they actually had no chance.
These photographs, taken 2 months later, show what may have been the cause of the fatalities. The metal fence that cut off the stairs was still there, lying flat. But also this, a manhole cover that was half open, and the root of a bush protruding. Could these have been what caused the victims to trip and fall? From the collapse of the cordons to the first warning at 4:35 p.m. by a police officer that a life-threatening situation was developing, half an hour passed. Why was there no communication? The 21 dead and 650 injured were not the only victims of the tragedy. The families of the dead, injured and traumatized still live with the disaster day after day. Although someone in the concert realized there was a problem, the public address system was drowned out by the music, which was allowed to continue. And the crowd control manager at the bottom of the ramp could not communicate with the police.
The tragic thing is, what many of those involved told me, is that of course those who were pushed over had no chance either. That is, they lay on people and of course didn't want to hurt them, but they couldn't get out, they had no chance. People stood in front of me and said, "I think I killed someone." I couldn't get my arm out. My arm was on the other's neck, and I tried to get my arm away from there, but I couldn't move my arm. And I think someone died because of me.
21 young people from 4 different countries who had come to enjoy music and dancing lost their lives senselessly in the unimaginable crush. The police made the decision to block the tunnel despite the opposition of the fire brigade, and then to allow the 3 masses of crowds to meet in the middle. It was a man-made catastrophe. The Love Parade disaster unfolded in Duisburg due to chaos following the collapse of police cordons. Hubert Klüpfel has studied many crowd disasters, each with its own characteristics, and they all have something in common.
Es gibt sogar schon relativ alt.
There is even a relatively old, an acronym, I think by John Fruin from the USA, that is called FIST, i.e. Force, Information, Space and Time, according to which if everything becomes scarce at the same time, then bad things like that happen. And in fact, this happened because there was this great pressure, there was little information, there was too little space, and it happened too quickly. And that was certainly the case with other disasters too, with the accident in Sheffield, at the football stadium, also with the accidents that took place in Mecca, for example.
In Mecca zum Beispiel gab.
2 questions continue to remain unexplained. Why did so many people want to leave at just 3:50 p.m. when the organizers expected most people to leave at around 6 p.m.? And why didn't they use the secondary ramp? Why did the police set up the cordons against the fire brigade's advice? Then why did so many people arrive all of a sudden at the same time from the western entrance, forcing the police to retreat to behind the small exit ramp?
There weren't enough emergency announcements. There weren't any loudspeakers for the police where they could have spoken to somehow direct people. There weren't enough stewards. There weren't enough toilets. Basically everything was lacking. And it was just too much, carried by the whole idea to make an event, to make money.
Ein Event zu machen, Geld zu machen, und darunter haben die ganzen Sicherheitsdinge gelitten.
In the following months and years, the city of Duisburg and investigators tried to understand what went wrong and who was to blame, but neither the police, nor the city planners, nor the organizers were held responsible. After 10 years, all charges were dropped and the trial cancelled due to the COVID pandemic. The fatal crush that killed 21 people and traumatized hundreds, however, was not the first crowd disaster.
Als die Ermittlungen dann angefangen sind, also was ich jetzt so im Nachhinein.
I now know in retrospect that when the investigation started, the Interior Minister here, Ralph Jäger, just 5 days or 4 days after the catastrophe. He stood before the police officers and said, "We did everything right." So the police did not make any mistakes. Well, then I asked myself this question later. The kind of question you ask yourself later when you realize what happened. Did he have any clairvoyant abilities? How did he know that the police were not at fault?
Jessica Weston would go on to write a book about the disaster, Dance or Die. She became close to Gabi as the two joined forces to push for truth and justice.
I still remember that the contact with Gabi became closer and closer because she also campaigned for the opening of criminal proceedings. So Gabi Müller is actually an absolute fighter. And when the court said in the first instance, "We are not opening the main proceedings," Gabi started collecting signatures and made an online petition. And that's when I got to know Gabi Müller more closely and shot more and more footage with her. By accompanying her, and right from the start, I was totally fascinated by what kind of a strong woman she is and what an absolute fighter she is.
Es wurde das Bauamt auf die Anklagebank gebracht.
The building authorities were brought to the dock, and some of the organizers' employees. None of the police, although the police shared responsibility, as the report later found. While those who were seen as the main people responsible, namely the head of the event company, namely Rainer Schaller, and the mayor, Sauerland, as well as the coordinator Rabe, none of these people were in the dock, so it was hard to understand that from the outset.
Das hat man von vornherein nicht verstanden.
Und dann, wie gesagt, als die Anklageschrift dann rauskam 2014, ja, da haben wir gedacht, das darf doch wohl nicht wahr sein.
When the indictment came out in 2014, yeah, we couldn't believe it. No one from the police was there, none from the regulatory office, because Mr. Rabe was from the regulatory office.
Alle. Und dann sind die hergekommen und haben gesagt,
and all the threads came together, all of them. They came here and said the property was going to be fenced in here, and then it came to construction. Construction department, yes. So what Rabe did was clear. So no one understands why he wasn't in the dock.
Aber bei dem lief alles zusammen. Deshalb, also es versteht keiner, warum der nicht auf der Anklagebank saß, ne?
The two people mainly responsible have never been tried. When asked to hand over his phone, it was found that Rainer Schaller had erased the text messages relating to the day. Although the city never re-elected the mayor, Adolf Sauerland, he was not held responsible in the courts.
Wir haben immer gesagt, an erster Stelle steht für uns die Aufklärung. Die Opfer und die Angehörigen wollen wissen,
We have always said that finding out what happened is our top priority. The victims and their families want to know what happened that day. Why did our children die? Who is responsible? That was always the most important question, because you cannot live without clarity, without clarification. You want to know what happened. The second priority for us has always been the compensation for the victims. That is, the victims must not be left alone. They are traumatized. The relatives think of their deceased. They need victim support. They need compensation in the form of money, because it makes life easier when there has been an upheaval in your life.
In Form von Geld, weil es das Leben leichter macht, wenn etwas da ist an Schadenersatz.
Local authorities seem not to be able to face the skeletons in their closets, comforted by the fact that no one has been held accountable in more than 10 years of investigation and trials. What went wrong in Duisburg on the 24th of July 2010 will never be fully known. The planners failed to plan for unpredictable events, such as a sudden influx of people in mid-afternoon. But more generally, the organizers cut some vital corners. They suffered from self-reassuring groupthink, or, more simply put, wishful thinking, convinced that whatever the weaknesses in planning, everything would go all right on the day.
Of course, the more shoulders the weight of the guilt is distributed across, the lower the individual guilt. And then the judge said, like, this one big villain does not exist, in his opinion. And he said, or we did not find him. For a lot of the relatives, and for those impacted, and for everyone, that was of course devastating. And somehow also a slap in the face. Because Gabi Müller also said to me at the time, I wasn't looking for someone to blame. I just wanted to know how it could have come about and who contributed to it.
In 2020, some 10 years after the Love Parade tragedy claimed 21 lives in Duisburg, a regional court definitively closed an investigation seeking to establish whether organizers were responsible for the tragedy. 10 defendants faced charges of negligent homicide and bodily harm. But just as the statute of limitations was about to expire, the coronavirus pandemic hit, making completion of the trial impossible, the court said. With no accountability in the courts, the disaster in Duisburg remains an open wound for Germany's judicial system, which, instead of shining a light on the uncomfortable truth, has blocked the road to justice, leaving the Love Parade disaster's victims in the dark.